Welcome to Powered by Snowflake, a series where I interview technology leaders building applications and businesses on Snowflake. I'm your host, Daniel Myers, and today I'm talking with Andy Petrella, founder and chief product officer at Kensu. Kensu is a data observability platform powered by Snowflake. Andy, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot, Daniel, for inviting me.
I am really excited to get to learn more about Kensu and about your background as the founder. So in your own words, tell me exactly what makes Kensu different in the observability platform space.
The way we try to address this new topic actually in the engineering world, right? So we know that data observability has emerged recently, like 2 years ago, but we know also that this is not something new either, right? So what we've been doing for since the beginning is applying exactly the same practice as in software engineering to the data engineering world, right? By taking the angle of data observability from the application standpoint, right? So instead of looking directly at the data, like in Snowflake, right, we would look directly at Snowpark and Snowflow instead of directly in Snowflake tables, right? So that's a little bit of shift in the way how to perceive data observability. And that's why I was happy when Aurelie asked me, hey, why don't you write a book about this new topic, right? So because you've been talking about this for so long, and now I'm working on that book for the last 10 months in order to explain to the whole ecosystem what are the best practices that can be embraced by everyone in the data space, and what can a data observability platform like Kensu offer to different personas.
That's pretty amazing. So tell me more about the background and history of Kensu. When was it founded, and what's that founding story?
So I founded it when when the data topic has emerged, right? So it's coming originally from a series of webinar and training that I gave in the past, right, about best practices in data since 2015. And we consolidated a set of practices that can be implemented in the platform that we initiated in 2019, right? So in 2019, we decided, okay, now we have enough content, we have enough practices that can be implemented in the platform that can scale, to the size of the data teams that have grown so fast in 2019, right? And so everything has started from the simple fact that me as a data engineer originally, struggling with data issues in production and testing in production. What does that mean, testing in production? So what does it mean for data engineering to actually use it as a best practice, but also diminishes, the responsibility that they have to take in order to enable this to such a practice. Yeah,
That's impressive. So tell me more about the scale. So the scale of the business. When exactly were you founded, and talk about some of the growth that you've had in the recent years.
we founded. I'm from Belgium, right? So in Liège. So I started the business here in Liège, in Belgium, and we grew pretty fast, right? So we had a great story, great first customers in large institutions such as banks and insurance, right? And Europe is not exactly US, so I found many interesting investors that really believed in the story. And this is a new category, so of course it really takes time to build, and we see that nowadays it scales very, very fast. So it was fascinating working with these people here. And because we grew so fast in the last 2 years, that we opened and we moved the headquarters here in where you are in San Francisco, we hired, and we're working with a super smart, actually, new CEO, Eleanor, since June, and now we're growing the business in the US. It has been crazy, and we are really happy also partnering with companies like Snowflake. We use the technology, but also there are many customers that we share, and this is really a fascinating moment for us.
So that's a pretty cool journey to be on. I mean, moving to San Francisco, that's a big deal. So tell me more about the scale of the product. How much data, on a data observability platform, how much data are you processing on a regular basis?
So per customer, it can go up we're talking about data observation here, right? So it's not like pure data. So But still, we receive several gigabytes per customer per day. And we're talking about metadata here, right? So the size of the customer's data are terabytes, zettabytes, right? But every time an application is running, and you know how many applications can run in a big corporation, right? So we get all this information on a regular basis, like several gigabytes per day for each customer that we accumulate in order to train our algorithms, in order to detect issues on the time series of information we're receiving. So, and we multiply this by so many customers, we end up with a scalable platform, right? Which is supported by two technologies, Snowflake on one side, and our backend, which is entirely built on scalable technologies such as Scala and associated technologies.
Beautiful, beautiful. So from here, I want to talk about the architecture that you've built. You mentioned a little bit of it just then, with a Scala backend and things like that. Tell me more about the architecture that you've built that supports that scale of a product that you have.
Yeah. So as I said, right, so it's built on Scala, so everything is immutable by default, is distributed, right? So so we have the first layer, which is connecting, not really connecting. So we have two ways of receiving the data. One way is having the, let's say, dbt and the Snowpark and etc. Sending the data directly to our web services, right? This is one way to get the data. And the other way is using our collectors, which are our own application connecting to APIs such as Snowflake APIs to receive the data, right? These are the two ways that we get the data into our ingestion phase. Then we move into our streaming, where we have two technologies. We use a lot of Redis Stream and other technologies such as Kafka and Pulsar, right? In order to accelerate and have a different pace of discoveries. Then we have a huge timescale DB, right? In order for our operational data source. And these are extracted with different processors that are also using distributed technologies such as Spark and stuff like that, in order to create views that can be directly explored and leveraged by all our customers in different strategies.
Yeah. That's a pretty powerful architecture that you've built out for this platform. I want to see a demo of this running right now. Can we see that demo?
Of course. So I'm showing Slack first. Of course, we have not developed Slack, right? But this is where data teams work every day, chat, discuss topics, issues, very quick actions to be taken. This is where also a lot of work is being taken, right? So we receive a lot of work in Slack. And this is why Kensu is integrated with Slack in order to provide insight about which data may require some attention, right? So here I show you a one identification that is built by and sent by Kensu, which not only describe that there is a data source that is named tickets table that has an issue, where you see that the number of rows for the failure column cannot be greater than 20, but we got 140, right? But actually, it also tells the data engineer in which application this problem is happening, right? So it's not outside of the context. It tells exactly, okay, in the operation control board application, there is something clunky happening now, right? So that gives enough information on the context in order to figure out whether or not the problem is a huge problem or is a minor problem that can be deferred, right? But because the engineer knows that this application is super important because this is the control board, right, that will be used directly by the users, they want to go directly in the application and see what's going on there, right? So by clicking on any of these links, they can get directly to the Kensu platform and logging in order to have access to a lot of information about this specific application in the project they have developed. So where the application is on GitHub, what is the current version that is running, and if the person scrolls down as a data engineer, they will discover what are the different data sources being used by this specific application, right? Input, output. And at the output, because this application is building the board, right, which is relying on the Snowflake technology, we see here the different data warehouse tables, right? And one of the input for these tables is actually showing some issues, right? I can dig into one of these data sources and I end up in the page for that data source, where we see that we have a huge issue, right? So we have 49 problems happening in the moment. Well, there is something that we must be doing about this data source now, right? If I click on this chart here, we will show how the data was used by this specific application over time, right? So here I'm showing the failure.number rows, right? So in this table, there is a column named failure, right? Which is the number of failure that the Kensu platform has detected, right? And the number of failures is growing very fast. So we have many different problems here because apparently the Kensu platform detects a lot of issues. So what is going on, right? So first thing that you want to do when you have such a problem, you want to understand in a bigger context what's going on, right? Because only the data source cannot provide enough information to figure out, what are the impacts and where the problem may come from. Because we don't want to fix the data, we want to fix the cause of the data problem, right? So what I can do because the Kensu platform aggregates all this information coming from the platform, such as DBT, Snow procedures, and stuff like that, right? If we go to the Explorer, we will show that the engineer can see how the different data sources are linked to each other. And you see that there are many different links between all of these data sources. Of course, because the data source is used across different applications, right? So in order to remove some of the noise here, what you can do in Kensu is that you can remove a lot of the information by using the projects. So the projects and the applications are dimensions that can be used in order to summarize information, so that here I'm only looking at the tickets table in the scope of the project named Kensu backend, right? So I remove most of the noise and I can try to understand where the problem was coming from. So I can browse the lineage up and down in order to find out what's the problem. And for instance, I can move to this operational data source here in order to find out what's going on. Or I can actually also look at the downstream, right? And I can take a look at this table here, which is one of the tables built by this ticket table, in order to understand what's going on. And you see here that it's Snowflake table. This is one of the most important tables that our customer uses, because this is building a dashboard about how they are, their efficiency in dealing with data issues, right? And apparently here, if I look at data observation that we receive for this table, right, there is the number of rules, freshness, and range that the Kensu platform receives on the platform, right? So if I click here, I show here the maximum number of freshness and range rules that were generated for this customer. We have a certain amount of rules that were generated, not insane, but compared to what I just shown in the tickets table. But now what I want to do is, okay, fine. I want to understand what's going on in this specific table now. So please tell me in this specific Snowflake table, what is looking like the maximum value for these two fields, right? I'm scanning the data now, right? Now Kensu is accessing to the Snowflake platform and computing only these two metrics that seem important for me, right? Now, right? And then it will put it into the time series in order to see where the problem is. And afterwards, what happens also is that if I refresh and I show it again, right? The computation has happened and one of the time series has grown like crazy. And of course, because there is a coincidence with the other topic that I've shown earlier. And here, because this problem can happen again, instead of scanning manually, I want this scan to happen every 2 hours, for instance, so I can schedule it. So that's one thing you can do, right? In the Kensu platform to get regularly the information about how the data has behaved. Now, very quickly, right, because it's interesting to know what are the impacts and to figure out how you can prevent them to happen again, right? In order to prevent them, what you can do by using the power of the lineage is that you can browse back to the very original source of the problem. Right? So I'm fast forwarding directly to where the problem happened at the very first time, which is in the ingestion API. So you can, because Kensu looks at the application, right? We can also generate data observation in a Scala web service, a Python web service, even PHP web service can generate visibility about the data, right? And here, what I'm going to show you is what looks like the ID.unique, which is the amount of data that we receive, which are unique every 2 hours. And we see that currently the amount of unique value is decreasing, which has generated a huge number of freshness issues to be detected by the Kensu platform because the data coming in are not of good quality. So based on this, with the Kensu platform, we can add rules and even secret breaker to avoid this problem to propagate towards the final user who are looking at the dashboard built on top of Snowflake and being worried about how many issues are currently happening in the platforms.
So this platform that you've built is obviously pretty powerful. I mean, it's pretty cool to see how you can get such a fine-grained level of detail from such a large sea of data. And it's cool to see how you can visualize that to really pinpoint and diagnose where these problems may arise in your data pipelines or your applications. So tell me more about how and why did you choose Snowflake to build this platform on?
Well, we have a lot of data. We have a lot of data to expose, right? And there are many different ways that the data that we are in generating insights for can be used by our customer, right? So instead of building 10,000 different custom dashboard or whatever, we decided to create a data warehouse that can export to our customers in different fashion, right? The fashion that they like, the data that we are building, right? So when we look around, right? So there are two factors that we use in order to choose Snowflake for that, right? First, we needed to scale, right? So we need to have something that scale easily with the minimal operations, right? And Snowflake was outstanding for that, right? And the second one is the ease of sharing the data, right? So that, of course, I'm from Europe, so GDPR is a big thing, right? So we have to be cautious about that, etc. So in order to make sure that we can share in a very secure fashion, easily minimizing the operation for that too was key. And when we were discussing and analyzing Snowflake, right? So there is a third fact that was very important for us to decide. I mean, we were already decided, but actually there was like a special bonus is that a lot of customers were using already Snowflake, right? So we didn't have to train them or whatsoever. It was already kind of native for them to use this in order to do the slice and dicing the data that we're providing independently from us.
So that's beautiful. So, and I hear that a lot, that your customers using Snowflake was a big reason why you chose Snowflake, because there's that natural ease by your customers and yourself when you're building a platform that's built on top of the same tools and platforms that your customers are using. So that's cool to hear. So tell me more about some of the most impactful features of Snowflake that have been used by your product. So, I see that your product, definitely is ingesting a lot of data. Do you use Snowflake's data sharing capabilities, for example?
Yeah, extensively. I mean, this is one of this is why we picked it up, right? So we said, okay, this is exactly what we wanted, right? And not only us, but also our own customers. So that is the very first feature that we integrated since day one, right? And we keep building on it, right? I mean, that's obvious, almost, I would say, right? Because this is very also unique, I would say, on the market, this kind of capability and the ease at which we can do it. Now, there is also the time machine that is very interesting. We use it for our own sake, but also we educate our customers and users how to use it. Because when you detect an issue in the data, in the patterns that I showed earlier, what you can do also, thanks to Snowflake, is go back in time and say, what are all the metrics that I want to gather in order to make sure that I could roll back almost to that thing, right? And I can rerun everything that is needed in order to reconstruct the data in the appropriate fashion afterwards. So that's something that not only we are using, but we are also recommending to our users, sending recommendation through the platform.
I love hearing that because, I talk to a lot of customers and they, a lot of times it doesn't click on all the different use cases that you can use time travel for. A lot of folks, they think, oh, I can use it to, as a recovery from a drop table or something like that. But there's actually a lot more use cases. You can go back and compare data at different times, see how it's changed, almost like a versioning system, for your data.
That's exactly how we use it, right? So I have talked about the secret breaker that is natively implemented in Kensu, right? So because we integrate with the applications, right? The applications are aware that they have ingested wrong data into the table, right? So what they can do is that they can use time travel in order to roll back to that point.
So from here, tell me more about what your customers should get most excited about over the next 6 to 12 months.
There is a lot of integration that we're building, right? So even DBT Core, for instance, which is coming along the way, Matillion, Fivetran, and all of these applications are coming, more and more connected to the platform. And we are building also more our engine. So there is the Kensu profiler. So the profiler is capable of building profiles for the data within context. So building different profiles depending on how the data is being used, right? So this engine is going to be improved over the 6 coming months in order to be able to tell that the data is good for this application but bad for the other one. So that's something that is exciting for our customers. That is actually diminishing quite a lot the alert fatigue, because we can target the people who are interested in certain application than the other, and therefore not impacted by data issues. That's a major improvement of the platform. And also what we're doing is stepping up in terms of automation by also detecting which application are not yet under monitoring, right? So that we give a coverage about where efforts can be spent and how much time it will be needed in order to recover to increase the coverage in order to get these applications in the Kensu platform.
I know I'm excited based on that roadmap. I think that's going to provide a huge amount of value and impact to your customers. So Andy, where should people go to learn more about Kensu?
So they can go on LinkedIn, where we are super active. There is Twitter, where we are also very active. But I would recommend to also go on our website, where they can see the platform in action and download the book that I'm writing. There is a Slack channel associated to it where we can help you onboarding and use data observability as goodwill.
Fantastic. Andy, I want to say a big thank you for joining me today on this interview. It's been great learning all about the Kensu platform and how you built it and powered it by Snowflake.
Thanks a lot, Daniel, for having me. It was great.
And to all of our viewers today, if you want to learn more about how to build your next application or business on Snowflake, check out developers.snowflake.com. And if you want to see other interviews like this with technology leaders in the space, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. My name is Daniel Myers. This has been another episode of Powered by Snowflake. See you next time.